You're listening to Themes and Memes, a different kind of movie review. Here with me, I have my co-host. Oh, I should probably introduce myself first. My name's Adam, in case you missed it. And here with me, I have my co-host Aaron, and we also have special guest Thomas Sheridan, who we've spoken with on a number of other occasions in the past. So, how are you guys doing today?
Doing well.
I'm great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Thomas. It's great to talk to you again.
No, it's great to hear your voices again. It seems like years.
I think it has been years.
Yeah, literally, I think that's correct. Yeah.
I think it's been about.
Maybe I'm just glad to be still alive. That's probably what it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's been about 2 years since we actually did a little roundtable like this. So it's going to be interesting to touch base again and see where we go. And we're going to review the film The Exorcist, so the original from 1973. This was actually something that Thomas suggested, so I hadn't really thought about it all that much, since I first saw it when I was a teenager, and to be honest, my memory wasn't that great, but after watching it again, I can see that there are a lot of interesting themes and threads that run through it in relation to a whole bunch of different things. So what I'm going to do is, as usual, just run through a quick synopsis of the plot, and then we can just kind of take it from there in terms of what kind of our observations were and things like that. So the film is, set sort of like circa late 60s, early 70s, and we first see this priest basically on an excavation dig in Iraq, and he comes across a statue of an ancient Babylonian demon called Pazuzu, and I think the story is that he, as a Catholic priest, had previously done an exorcism involving this particular demon, and so he was kind of shocked to uncover this statue of it because it's, there's some kind of personal history there for him. The film then tracks across to Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And it shows the actress, what's her name, Chris, I think it is. And she's a single mother, and she's doing a film shoot involving some kind of like a student protest at a university or something like that. And, it basically just shows her going about her career and hanging out with her friends. And she's got a young daughter called Reagan at home, and Reagan, mysteriously starts to exhibit all this weird behavior. She first starts looking at this Ouija board and playing around with that, and then she starts acting up, and she's swearing and being rude, and I think she's stealing. And so the mother takes her to a psychiatrist. They can't figure out what's wrong with her, but simply say that it's some kind of weird, what they call hyperkinetic behavior, and so they prescribe her Ritalin, which is very interesting. They're not really interested in sending her to a psychiatrist, but they put her on Ritalin. But things just continue to get worse with Reagan's behavior. She was becoming more and more obscene and out of control, to the point where these poltergeist sort of activities start happening. The bed starts shaking. She's got it's like supernatural strength and all this type of stuff, and the mother's, going out of her mind. There are also a number of mysterious deaths in their circles, of course, which are suspected that it might be something to do with her. And to cut a long story short, they continue trying to get help from the medical industry. So they're taking her to psychiatrists and neurosurgeons, and they're basically throwing their hands up in the air and saying, we don't know. She's having scans and x-rays and all kinds of stuff done. And they eventually just give in and say, well, maybe what you need is a priest to perform an exorcism, because we're out of options. And so this is what happens. She gets a local Catholic priest to start filing a request to the Catholic Church to perform an exorcism on the young girl, and they send in the other priest who I mentioned at the beginning of the film, the guy who was in Iraq. And they both, the two of them both perform this exorcism on the girl over a period of, I think, about an evening or a day or something. Now, this older priest, Marin, his name is, he unfortunately dies of a heart attack during the exorcism. And the younger priest, I think it was Damien, I think it was, he eventually says to the demon, look, take me instead. And so the demon takes possession of his body. He throws himself out a window and kills himself sacrifices himself to save the young girl, and of course that's basically the end of the story. So the exorcism does work, although it cost the lives of both priests involved and other people within the film as well. So there's a lot going on in this film. I think there's a whole bunch of different angles we could talk about, but I mean, just off the top of your head, Thomas, what would you say are some of the most interesting observations you made?
Well, let me tell you about my history with this film. I
Mm.
can remember when I was a little kid in my parents' house, and my aunt and uncle coming over, and they had seen the film like a few days before in the cinema when it was first released, and they were warning my parents not to go see it because they were having nightmares about it. It had affected them that deeply, and my old man was laughing at them. And then he and my mother went to see the film, and it freaked them out as well. So I had a very, what's the word, intense initial insight into the film at a very young age, but also a kind of a mystique where it already kind of had become culturally and psychologically and emotionally powerful inside me that I wanted to see it. And I did not see it until I was about 17, and we got our first VCR. It was actually a Betamax, Sony Betamax, and someone had taped an illegal copy of the film. And I just thought, I knew about the scenes, such as the violent sort of like using the crucifix as a dildo. And I expected to laugh at the film because then I was like, I'm 17, I'm different, I'm grown up, and I heard about it from my friends and we laughed. But I actually saw the film, it actually freaked me out big time. And even though I was well sort of, appropriated with like slasher films and everything, video nasties, as they called them back then, this film really affected me. And not to the point where I had nightmares, but I knew that there was something very special about this film, more than just the terror and the frightening thing. Now, we see that film today. To the average person, it would probably just be an interesting film. But let's go back to 1973 when it was released. They were still making Hammer horror films, which were basically kind of like costume romps that didn't get particularly intense, and that was the level of horror. And suddenly this remarkable film shows up that takes it to the extreme. And I think it's like you have to sort of see it in the period of the time. And that was how the film affected me. And I actually think it's one of the greatest movies ever made. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's certainly shot very well. But Aaron, what were your thoughts on the film?
Yeah, I had read similar things to what Thomas is describing here, as people's reactions to the film were so intense, and it has this it has a reputation that's lasted to this day, and that's impressive because, as we're saying, over the years, standards have changed where you can get away with showing a lot more in film. However, I think the real thing going on here is that when you touch on super dark and real things like this film does, the disturbing aspect and the violent aspect, it actually works. It's not just a dumb horror movie where you're just chopping people's arms off for no reason just to do it, like a Gwar concert or something. There's actually a meaning to it. And so that meaning is a mysterious one. It's one that kind of seems straightforward on the surface, but there's so much more. And I also like this film as a social critique, just a critique of the modern world as well. I'll just throw that in real quick.
Yeah, I can see what you're going with there. I mean, we sort of touched on a few of those aspects of the social critique factor, via email before the podcast here, and I think that's definitely relevant in terms of like the health industry, so like pharmaceuticals, but big pharma, psychiatry, that kind of thing. But I just want to throw in that I sort of I totally agree with the what you're saying about the relevance of the film and the time that it came out, because this film had this mystique and this kind of reputation as being one of the most shocking films ever made. Now, I mean, I first saw it when I was a teenager, and I think I was at like a sleepover or something like that, and I just thought it was silly because I wasn't really paying attention. But after watching it again now as an adult and looking back, I can definitely see how this would have been a truly disturbing film, back in the day, because we're seeing the total destruction of innocence. This young girl just performing these absolutely obscene, lewd sexual acts and swearing and all this type of stuff. And I think I'm not sure whether this is one of those urban legends or what have you, but I think the story was that when this first came out in the cinemas, they actually did have to have medical teams on standby outside the cinema, because so many people were going into the film and coming out, basically having some kind of a nervous breakdown or a panic attack or something like that. I mean, do you know anything about that, sort of all those stories, Thomas?
No, I never heard that one, but that's the kind of things that the Hollywood people put out there before films have like gone on worldwide release. Those days they used to show them in the US first, and then build up the hype there, and then they would travel around the world. So usually, when growing up in Ireland, you'd hear about the new film in America. Did you hear they have people that were taken to the hospital during it and things like that? It was brilliant marketing. But having said that, I want to talk about the film a little deeper in terms of what I get from it. And what I get from it is that I don't even see a horror film. I actually see a beautiful story of a mother trying to win her daughter back, and two complete strangers, two Catholic priests who owe this woman nothing. I don't even think she's Catholic. I think she's Protestant in the story, and they're willing to give their lives, and they do, in order to return a child back to its mother. Now this film could have fallen to pieces very easily. It could have been laughable. It could have been a joke. But there was two elements, I think. Well, there was three elements that I think really brought it home. One, the acting is outstanding. I think Ellen Burstyn is incredible, and Linda Blair, for a child, was unbelievably good. Tell me a child actor that could pull that role off and be remembered for it for this day, without it being cutesy like a Spielberg film, like Close Encounters or E.T. Secondly, it looks amazing, and I think it was nominated for an Oscar for cinematography. You pay careful attention to how it's made. It looks like a Vermeer painting in how it's lit, or a Caravaggio painting, I should say, in how it's lit. The scenes are soft. There's a seamless transitions from the exterior outside scenes into the interior scenes. That's a very, very difficult thing to do artistically and technically, especially back then. Also, Friedkin, the guy who made it, was quite a unique director who understood that things were on the line with this film, and Ellen Burstyn referred to him as a maniac. In order to keep everybody in a state of hypertension, he used to do things like fire off guns beside the actors' heads and things like that, or call them, or insult them and call them names, keeping them constantly in a state of hypervigilance and terror. And that becomes very apparent because there's a scene in that film where it changes, and it's actually one of the most frightening scenes in the film, is when she appears there's a kind of like a dinner party, and there's some like kind of namby-pamby priest singing show tunes on the piano, and then there's an astronaut there as well to show that she's part of American high society. Yeah. And then the little girl walks in her little nightgown, and she says to the astronaut, "You're going to die up there," and then she urinates all over the floor. And from that point in the film on, you can really see the tension levels change. Now, he was doing things, Friedkin, like surrounding the sets in refrigeration units, so it was constantly cold, so the actors were never relaxed, and you could see the steam from the breath and things like this. That's why it cost a staggering $10 million to make when it was made, just because in a pre-CGI day, you literally had to do things like that, and it's made some like $500 million since in profits. But the film is never spoken about in terms of a masterpiece of a movie, because where you can do anything with computers. Back then, it was literally all rough and ready. It was people shaking the bed, putting up fridges, but the masterful use of light. Watch it again and be amazed by the light. It's incredible.
Yeah. Definitely a good film. And picking up where you were talking about how it's a story about a mother and her child, and the selfless selfless acts of others to keep that relationship going. I definitely enjoyed the aspect of the mother doing everything that she possibly could by following the rules, going to the doctors, consulting them. And they're just, besides not being helpful, they're very harmful. They're arrogant, and they subject the poor girl to all these traumatic tests, which are obviously not going to help anything. And also, when she's on the bed and she's being possessed by this demon, she's flying around doing all these crazy things that are unexplainable. And the doctors are there. They're not just listening about this story as a story. They're seeing it. And then after seeing it, they go, well, we just have to conduct more tests. And they're completely unable to concede to the fact that they can't do anything, and that medical science just has no place in this. They just keep going, being hard-headed about and arrogant, and be like, oh yeah, let's just put it in front of another machine and it'll work itself out.
Yeah. Until Linda Blair grabs one of the doctors by the balls and lifts him up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I definitely, was thinking about that at the time because, it's very striking the way in which these psychiatrists are actually witnessing paranormal events with their own eyes. So she's, the bed is rocking and she's floating off the bed. She's gone pale. She's talking in this deep kind of demonic voice, and then their answer is, well, it's all in her head. The problem is not her bed. The problem is in her mind. And it's like you've just seen something occur in the physical world that is, obviously outside the realm of her own mind, and yet they're still sticking to this line of the psychiatric, or not even psychiatric, but just this pure pharmaceutical approach. And as I said, their first answer or solution is to put her on Ritalin, which I thought was very, very interesting. And they just kept on going with that, where it was like, it's we need tests, we need drugs. And the other aspect, which is interesting, is that they really seem to be quite down on the notion of psychiatry in this. She's at one of these it seems to be quite an elite kind of a hospital or asylum or what have you, and they're discussing possible treatment plans and whatnot, and they really sort of dismiss the idea that this could be something that could be resolved through some kind of a therapeutic, psychiatric or psychological process. That they're looking at in a purely reductionistic manner, where it's just, something is wrong with the brain. The brain needs to be altered or tuned or fixed with chemicals. And so that really, really stood out to me.
It was kind of the precursor of the kind of Richard Dawkins, Brian Cox mindset that, this sort of cognitive dissonance in the face of things they can't understand. That it just doesn't exist to them. They will not entertain the idea that this is, there was a time, even back then, where a scientific person would say something like, I don't know, it's a mystery. But this film is unique in that the fact that they don't even want to acknowledge that it exists.
Yeah.
And then they eventually throw it off to the Catholic Church, not because they failed, but they somehow imply that the mother has failed, and that's why she loses her nut with them. Yeah. She goes, after all this money and everything, you're sending me to a bunch of witch doctors, something like this. But it was almost like she was responsible. The child was responsible. Science could possibly never be wrong.
Yeah, it's like because these events don't fit into the mechanistic scientific model, then by definition they cannot exist. And because the scientific model and method is infallible, then therefore it must be something wrong, with as you say, with the mother. It's kind of inferred.
Yeah, that's dark. That's one of the darkest elements of the movie, I think. It's just the struggle that the mother's going through. And if you're talking about artistic, this film being artistic and well done, I think the way they did those scenes with the machines was brilliant.
Yeah,
how terrifying! The noises. Oh god!
When she's having the temporal lobe examination, and they put the iodine on the side of her head.
Yeah,
it's this brutal sort of meaty, rough and ready 1970s science, medical science.
Yeah, that was disturbing. I remember that it was there's this traumatized young girl is lying there in a gown on this bed, and you've just got these enormous big industrial machines whizzing around, going bang 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 like a jackhammer or something. And it's this is supposed to be helping her, supposedly.
Yeah, but Pazuzu would seem like a better option in that case.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is before the possession is taken has become full on. So I don't know if it's implying that that aided in the process. I didn't really get that, but
I've got a little interesting note
yeah,
on
I
that.
think there's actually a point there that you made, Aaron, that's bang on. I think that actually did something to it, made it worse.
Well, get this. In the film, the point at which she seems to cross a threshold, shall we say, with the possession, where her behavior goes from being strange and rude to, outright obscene and possessed, is actually the point where she's in the hospital, and I think it's when she gets injected with something. And I found that very interesting because her behavior changes markedly. At the point that the needle goes into her arm, she's injected with some kind of a serum or whatever it is. It's not explained what it is, but it's at that point where there's some kind of device that's used to show that at that point, as this needle is going in, that she's becoming fully possessed at that point. I think she sees a demonic face in her own mind. That the music sort of swells behind this all, and things kind of go down from there. So I'm wondering as to whether there was some kind of a hint or message going on regarding the treatment she was getting, and whether that actually induced this possession to a higher degree or what have you.
Well, talking about the idea of the trauma inducing it, let's look at the whole. This is what I love about the film, is all these sort of everyone is sort of not only exercising her but exercising themselves. It begins with her playing with a Ouija board in a family that the mother and father just broke up. She's the perfect age for what they'd call a poltergeist experience. She's on the cusp of puberty. Mm-hmm. The family is breaking up. This is usually the classic poltergeist scenario when things start flying around. A young girl approaching or at the start of puberty, and there's problems in the home, either a breakup or pedophilia or something like that, or financial problems or alcoholism. So that's starts off at a perfect kind of poltergeist type thing. You think it's going to start off by that. There's one scene, she becomes less and less, shall we say, vital in her behavior, especially the scene when her mother screams at her father on the phone, "You can't be at your daughter's birthday," in this kind of thing, right? Right after that, there's a scene where she films something she films a scene outdoors where it's like a Vietnam War protest in a movie she's making. She comes back to the house, I think, and there's a part in the film right there where she walks into the darkened kitchen and nearly everyone switches it off, but Pazuzu arrives in the house and his face is shown in the corner of the movie in the dark. Go back and watch it again. Just before she walks into the kitchen, Pazuzu's face lights up as about the size of a tennis ball in the darkness, and then she switches on the light, and that's to announce that Pazuzu, the demon, is now in the home. And then you have the thing with the rats in the attic and all this, what they call the noises in the attic. It's really quite frightening when you start thinking it, because she's invited Pazuzu into the home using the Ouija board. Now, on top of the other traumas, there's other traumas. Everyone else is being brought together by a trauma. And if you look into the history of things like demonic possession and things like that, and believe even the idea of the demons coming into a community, it's very commonly happens around this idea of trauma. There's in the idea of the Jewish tradition in Eastern Europe, you have this thing called the Dybbuk. The Dybbuk is like a jinn. It's like the Hebrew version of the jinn. And there's writers like Ivis Bishevitz Singer wrote an amazing short story called The Last Demon, where the demon has survived the massacre and the pogroms of this Jewish community in Poland. The demons are associated with problems, disasters, trauma. And there's loads of this going on in the film. You have Ellen Burstyn breaking up with her husband. You have the younger priest, Father Karras. He can't provide for his aging, dying mother. His brother is giving him a hard time, saying, "What use are you? You made all your education, wanted to become a priest." This kind of thing. So he's riddled with guilt. His pivotal moment of when his sort of engaging with the possession begins when he sees a homeless person in the subway, and he goes, "Can you spare some change for a Catholic father?" This kind of thing. And then that voice is then echoed by the demon later on in the film. This kind of thing. The housekeeper is suspected of being a Nazi by the friend of her, Jack McGowan, who incidentally died right after the film was made, and he was the first person killed in the movie by the demon. Now that's so in the film he actually is the first one killed by the demon, because he was wise to the fact that maybe the guy was a Nazi and the demon did know this, an ex-Nazi. And then there's all the other things going on, like you have the older priest knows he has a date with destiny, he's probably going to die. When you start like really thinking about it, you see a film that's almost got this kind of like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy kind of layering of characters inside it. And this is why I was amazed when I saw the original review in the New York Times from 1973 by some dingbat film reviewer. And this is a point we go to, who completely missed the point of what that film was about. He talked about it like it was Carry On Screaming or something, like a joke film. And yet, that's because we have a different perception and engagement with things like the occult, particularly in the alternative movement. It's all over society now, even represented in everything from like heavy metal music, everything, right? Today, than we did back then. And I think that's really what that film is really showing us and teaching us is the further we have become Pazuzuified, use that expression, the less shocking that movie is.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah. I go back and forth too, because it definitely is less shocking, but at the same time, for anybody who has looked at occult matters and done it seriously, I feel like the film, again, you actually take meaning from it for one thing, but it's also more disturbing, and it doesn't become about like the visual, the blood, and all the horrible. It's more about the act of this girl saying all these weird sexual things just to begin with. Like, that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
Well, that is yeah, that is interesting. I was thinking about this last night when I was watching it, and I find it interesting that when we talk about an illustration of outright evil and destruction of innocence, and things that are supposed to disturb us on the deepest level, what we're talking about here is the idea of a young girl, so somebody, an archetype of innocence, displaying grotesque, lewd, sexual behavior. So the idea that the sexual is something that, when it's out of context, is the most disturbing thing. I think we kind of take that for granted. We all are appalled when we hear about things like sexual abuse and pedophilia and other kind of like inappropriate or abusive behaviors. But I was just really thinking about why is that, and how well this kind of fits, into the idea of again the destruction of innocence. That this is not so much about the young girl throwing up or sort of floating off her bed, but the most disturbing things are when she makes these lewd sexual gestures and comments and things like that. I mean, again, this would have been so much more disturbing back in 1973. But I mean, even today, it is disturbing, but perhaps not as much as it was back then. And so I see what you're saying. It's we've all become, it's like you were saying, Thomas, we've all become Pazuzuified to the point where, although this is obviously distasteful and offensive, it is nowhere near as distasteful and as offensive as it would have been back then.
Yeah, where was Miley Cyrus back then?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There were
it was in the charts. It was like completely innocent by today's standards. See, if we look, that's what's amazing about it. I think, like just like Carl Jung said, art has the ability to predict the future. The things like her grabbing the guy and saying, lick me, a 12, 13-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't Miley Cyrus this like teen child star at Disney? And these are the kind of things she does on stage now. Not that long later, I might add.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's what's so interesting about it. This would, another thing that's interesting is they had 2 Jesuit priests on the set as advisors.
Oh.
Now, whether we're getting some kind of Freudian insight into their minds, probably, or as if they were somehow warning us that this will come. I'm not a Christian, so it doesn't bother me that way. But I find that very interesting. I find it very interesting the Catholic Church loved this movie. They completely, well, it portrays two Catholic priests as heroes, totally.
Yeah, exactly. They're the two that give their lives selflessly for the little girl. So yeah, it couldn't be better in terms of depiction of the characters on film.
Yeah, and it kind of, in a way, I mean, I'm not sure about what was going on in the Catholic Church at that time in particular, but of course we know that the Catholic Church is unfortunately well known for abuse scandals of child abuse involving priests and children, and so in this film what we're seeing is that the abuse comes at the hand of a demon, and that the abuse is resolved, that it's ended, the situation is resolved by the Catholic Church. So it makes sense that they would like the depiction given there, because I guess it goes against common perceptions of child abuse in the Catholic Church by presenting them as the heroes and the saviors of someone who has been abused by this possession.
The two advisors. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. No, I spoke. You go ahead, Aaron.
I was just to say the two advisors mirror perfectly the two priests on screen in that regard. And in terms of the title character of The Exorcist, the Father Merrin, to me, he kind of came off as being a guy who's beyond religion. He's a guy who's a Jesuit priest and a scholar, but your introduction to him is as an archaeologist digging up Mesopotamian ruins. You don't know he's a Jesuit priest at the beginning. You think he's an archaeologist. It's only later at the end of the film that he dons his vestment and all that. But earlier in the film, when he's in Iraq, he kind of like walks by these Muslims kneeling toward Mecca and all that. He kind of walks by without even looking at them, and to me, it just kind of implied like religion didn't really matter to him. He was more into like studying civilization and the dark sort of occult forces that have existed throughout time and how they manifest themselves. And he's this guy who's this sort of outsider within the church itself, because the other people at Georgetown and the other Catholic guys that decide to bring him in are like, well, yeah, where is he? I don't know. Like he nearly died a few years back. He's writing a book. I don't know. Call him in.
Yeah.
Interesting character.
And also, there's an intriguing scene at the very beginning too when he first digs up the statue of Pazuzu. And he mutters something, and you have to have the subtitles on. And what he says is evil against evil.
Ooh.
And that's an interesting comment in light of what Adam was just saying. I found that very strange, that scene. And then he goes and faces Pazuzu as a giant statue in the desert. There's two dogs ripping each other to bits. And then you have the wind, which is what Pazuzu represents. He's the demon of the southwest wind. Southwest wind. And you have that. So that whoever made that film had definitely done their homework into sort of demonology and Babylonia and things like that, and artistically brought it very well into the film. But that scene always was very strange. Evil against evil. Whatever that meant, and then the clock stops later on too, as well. That the opening scene alone is something that needs a lot more, a lot more viewing. Is like, why did he leave the Catholic Church and go work as an archaeologist in Iraq? Was he aware of evil within the church? And that's why he said evil against evil. He dug the thing out of the ground. It's like the whole archetypal thing, the Jungian idea of anything dark is buried in the subconscious mind, but if you don't deal with it, it comes flying up to the surface. Was Father Marin himself sent to Iraq because he was a pedophile?
Yeah.
There's like endless questions there. Endless questions.
Yeah. There are some... I was thinking about the notion of either Father Merrin and or some of the other psychiatrists we see in this film having some kind of a broader or higher understanding of what's going on, because there are certain little aspects of his demeanor, certain way that they speak, inflections and such, Again, this goes for some of the psychiatrists as well, and also the investigator, the detective, who's kind of on the scene, just sort of investigating and asking questions in the background. I haven't really fleshed this out, but I got an intuitive kind of a gut feeling that with some of these characters, these more senior characters, shall we say, within the film, that there was some kind of a knowledge of what was going on that they weren't necessarily telling everybody about. That either this, the Father Merrin, knew what was happening and knew the history of this demon, or sort of some deeper meaning as to what the story was that he wasn't sharing. That perhaps some of these psychiatrists knew that this was something more arcane, more serious, and more occult. Yeah. And same thing goes with the investigator, or this detective, at least anyway, as well. That he seemed to have been piecing things together. A lot quicker than anybody else. And he didn't let it on. He was just asking questions and being very flippant and just, I'm just sort of turning over some rocks, etc. But yeah, I just kind of got the gut feeling that some of these characters were sort of were keyed in or tuned in to the deeper sort of story, or that perhaps knew what was going on and weren't letting on. I mean, did you guys pick up on any of that at all?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with the investigator. I mean, he leads on Damien by saying, yeah, don't you think these, all these desecrations of the church, and what do you think of this? And he's kind of implying that he already knows. Yeah. And he goes, Damien is like, oh, yeah, I wrote a paper on that. And the investigator goes, oh, yeah, I read it. So he clearly knows what's going on, and he leads the mother in the same way. Yeah.
I love the character played by Lee J. Cobb of the cop, and I love you can actually see he has a genuine affection. He wants friendship with the younger priest, Father Karras. Yeah, you can see that, but it's almost like he's really much more interested in the older priest. Which, especially when he says to him, "Did you know how Burke, whatever his name was, the film director, died? His head was turned around completely backwards. How would a child do that?" So he thinks that and then he says to him, "What do you think? Some kind of sick priest in the diocese?"
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's specifically looking there. I'd forgotten that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost as if he seems to have clicked onto the fact that this was a position before anybody else. This is kind of intimated through some of these questions and comments that he makes that, yeah, he understands that this is most likely what's going on. He can't come out and say it and tell everybody that that's what he thinks is going on, but he's leading people toward that sort of conclusion, or toward the exorcism, through kind of suggestion and through questioning.
Yeah.
So.
What else should be mentioned is that this all takes place at Georgetown University.
Yes.
In Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So you've got so many huge things going on. You got high society convening. Yeah. You've got a film being filmed here. You've got a major academic institution, which is run by the Jesuit order of the Catholic Church. You've got academia. You've got the church, you've got the state with Washington, D.C. So clearly, this film's making a commentary on all that. I'm not quite sure what all that is, to be honest.
Well, America was still knee-deep in the Vietnam War at that time, so that might have something to do with it as well. America was tearing itself apart for the first time in its history in 1973 because of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, you just got me thinking about some of the shots that you see. This is in relation to the whole idea of this whole story taking place within a kind of elite high society setting. So again, you've got Georgetown University. You've got the sort of the entertainment industry, and then you've got all of these psychiatrists or whatever they are. The doctors that the girls being taken to, they seem to be at the higher end of the spectrum. They're sort of these big prestigious hospitals, and even the church as well. We're looking at big grandiose churches when he's making an application to the other priests to perform the exorcism, or to get permission to perform the exorcism, which is interesting. We should talk about that. But I noticed that they have a lot of the same decor, and it kind of reminded me of sort of a Masonic decor in a lot of ways, because you see in the church itself, they have a white and red checkerboard floor pattern, and you also see a white and red checkerboard floor pattern in the asylum, and I think you also see it in the in the offices of the Jesuits as well, or at least in one other location. So, when you see these same sort of symbolic patterns popping up again and again, it does remind me of the the kind of elitist overtones in that. So the fact that it was shot in Georgetown and revolving around the university, revolving around these elite academic institutions, and revolving around the highest levels of the Catholic Church, at least in that area, is very interesting, isn't it?
It also tells us something about the Catholic Church in different ways too. Like they were trying to break away from their sort of spooky reputation. They don't want it to have the exorcism. You know, is that?
Yeah.
Like she practically has to beg him.
Yeah.
And then he's extremely cynical, Father Karras himself.
Yeah.
But eventually it goes ahead. Now, I was reading a very funny not funny, but like very ironically funny, amusing, should I say, article the other day, where the Catholic Church can't get exorcists anymore because the young priests are just scared. So even in the Catholic Church, we have this snowflake phenomena. You know, the phenomenon of the snowflake, where we have a generation that's grown up that's afraid of everything, and they need safe spaces.
Yeah.
And they suffer microaggressions, and they're offended by everything, and they've got a great fear. They're easily rattled and disturbed, and they need safe spaces because they're all snowflakes. And so that phenomenon is showing up in the Catholic Church. Now, this is here we go again, right? In the film, excuse me, in the film, Pazuzu attacks the most innocent element in the epicenter of this Georgetown thing that represents the universities, the Hollywood people, the astronauts, the top knobs in the church. It goes for a little girl, the innocent thing, right? So there's element of the demons can only possess the most innocent flowers. And we're entering a society, what I'm seeing it online even, where people, like, if you look at anything, any kind of millennial newsletters or websites like, I don't know, like Dangerous Minds or Vice, they actually, and you look at the kind of people who will actually turn a blind eye to Hillary Clinton's, mass murdering genocide in order to point out what an evil man Donald Trump is because he says grab him by the pussy, which doesn't kill anybody, but she's killed God knows how many thousands. They've a fear. They think anything that happened before the year 2000 is disgusting and offensive.
Yeah.
You see that. There's a generation of soft wimps and weaklings coming along. And if there's a lesson in that film, The Exorcist, for the society today, it's that we have a generation that's growing up that will probably be extremely easily possessed by whatever archetypes of Pazuzus come along.
Yeah, because in a way they're more naive than ever and very innocent in that sense. And something I really liked was that it showed the Catholic Church as you'd think they'd be all on board. Yeah, we do exorcisms. Yeah, it's a spiritual matter. Yeah, we're the church. That's who you go to. Hey, thanks for coming to us. But no, again, the church kind of wants to change its image because all those old sort of silly religious ideas are outdated now. And scientism was so big that the Jesuits knew that, like, hey, look, we have to get on board with this. We're the learned academic order of this church, so we're the ones who have to do that. Georgetown University is one of our big tools for doing that in the U.S. So, and then you've got the character of Damien just exuding everything about that, where he just cannot believe the spiritual side of this. And, he in the beginning goes, yeah, I'm struggling with my faith. Because he'd gone through all this training, all these different universities in psychiatry, all that any sort of religious or quasi-spiritual ideas are just beat out of him.
Yes.
Because it was a professional thing. He was getting professional training, and it just beats that all out of you.
Yeah, that's very interesting because we see this. He's, again, as you say, he's very resistant to the idea that this could be real. The whole notion of him being a Jesuit and a priest, and he's working in these mental hospitals as a psychiatrist or what have you. He's very resistant to all of that because the idea of his career and his faith they're sort of intermingled, where it's just kind of like a day job to him. You know, I mean, obviously he's suffering a crisis of faith anyway because of the death of his mother, but you know, it's interesting when you see that when the mother is, you know, the mother of the girl Regan, when she is, you know, approaching him and saying, "Look, we need you to do this exorcism," he is talking about all of these bureaucratic processes and evidence and making a formal appeal, or sorry, a formal request to the Catholic Church. And it's like, oh, we can't just go ahead and do an exorcism. We've got to collect our evidence, then we've got to submit it to this person, and we need this particular bit of evidence, and then they've got to give permission. And so they've kind of turned it into this kind of scientific bureaucratic nightmare, when what we're supposed to be dealing with here is a matter of faith. It's a matter of metaphysics. It's supposed to be more about empathy and intuition and goodwill and all these types of things. But the elevation of the Catholic faith into the highest levels of academia and bureaucracy results in this complete this kind of stonewalling, which is trying to, you know, just get this guy to come and heal her daughter. And he's talking about all of these, these bureaucratic processes, and about trying to find the evidence, and is this actually going to qualify for exorcism? And there's even one scene where he says, well, what we need to get evidence of her speaking in a language that she's never spoken in before, you know, and then we also need to get some evidence of some of the, what is it, you know, strength, you know, supernatural strength or something. And it's like he's crossing off these boxes on a form or something like that, you know. And I just found that was that's really interesting.
What you said there about the evidence that the priest wants, what brings it to him in the end is when he puts on his dead mother's voice.
Oh yeah,
I had chills when I first saw that scene. And later on, the priest says to him, the older priest, Father Marin, says to him, "The demon is a liar. Never believe a word it says, because the attack it uses is a psychological attack." And I thought that was brilliantly done in that scene, because the actor who played Father Karras almost like froze in his steps. You could hear, like, you know, and then he tried to play it cool with the demon, like it was not to show that he was terrified or shocked, or let the demon knew on what he was talking about. That she'd actually said the exact words, the last words he'd ever heard his mother say. You know, "Why do you leave me, Damie?" Something like that. It was quite frightening. And then at one point, he has an hallucination and sees his mother inside Linda Blair's body.
Yeah.
During the actual exorcism.
I think the depiction of evil in this film was very, very interesting, because what they're showing you is that there's a number of scenes where the demon is trying to fool the younger priest, and you know, as you say, with the putting on his mother's voice, and you know, the older priest is saying, "Don't listen. It's all a psychological attack. You can't actually engage with this thing. You just got to keep the course and just keep going ahead with the process here." And I just thought that was there was a really kind of a striking depiction of what evil is, because it can't be creative. You know, it has no real power. It's like all of the scary, intimidating, shocking things that it does to try and engender fear and submission from the people around it are basically like parlor tricks in a lot of ways. It's all to do with making a door slam or levitating a bed or what have you. But you know, when it's shown that the demon is unsuccessful in trying to sort of undermine this priest, you know, he says that he's putting on the mother's voice, and it's saying, well, okay, well, if you know the story of my mother and all the rest of it, then what was her maiden name? And the demon just throws up some green slime instead of answering the question. You know, so it gets angry. Yeah. You know, so it's basically getting angry over the fact that it's been exposed as a fraud. You know, that all of its supposed power is to do with image. It's to do with it's theatrics. You know what I mean? And it can't be creative. It has no real power. It's all to do with psychologically getting you to believe that it's got power. And I thought that was very, very interesting in terms of a depiction of what evil really is.
It's also true.
It's true.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's also true. The demon that Crowley and Newberg summoned up in the desert, Choronzon 333. The demon is very similar to Pazuzu in that it is a nonsense maker, and the way you banish Choronzon 333 is very similar to how, Karis dealt with the demon by by bluffing it and calling it out as a bullshitter, because that's the thing with this is the thing in the occult. Demons, and Crowley wrote some very extensively on this, that they're nonsense makers. That they will, when they possess someone, that they will create lies and nonsense in order to distort.
Yeah.
And the more you engage with them, like I read a fabulous thing recently that someone had sent me by a guy who was like way up in the OTO about Choronzon on things like Facebook, and it's basically you can spot Choronzon's sort of footprint on people on Facebooks by when they when they try to derail conversations, they spout nonsense that goes nowhere. And when you immediately ignore them, they die. This is the trait of Choronzon, and probably Pazuzu as well. I'm just assuming that is this idea that the demon's power is only developed by the engagement with it.
Yes.
So therefore, the more you're engaging with the demon's, shall we say, mystique, the demon's persona, like the whole thing I do with the psychopaths, no contact ever again. Just get the fuck away and do not engage on any level, and you diminish its power. And Father Karras was figuring that out, and that's why it vomited in his face. Because at one point it even says, "Well, who are you?" "I'm the devil."
Yeah.
And Karras plays a blinder by just saying, "I don't believe you," like shrugging his shoulders. Really, "I don't believe you."
Yeah. It's good how it brings it back to the psychological aspect too. It doesn't negate that, and how so much that goes on in your own head can get the best of you. And in the occult tradition, it's long been understood that like mental illness and all sorts of forms of insanity can be induced just by giving energy to these, quote unquote demons in your own head. If you obsess over all these horrible things that happen in your life, if Damien, Father Karen, were to do that and just continually think about his mother, he would drive himself to insanity. And you could say that he might be possessed by a demon. And here maybe he's, all the knowledge of that too. At the same time, all the knowledge of psychiatry and that can happen won't save you. You have to have like this fortitude and just saying no and being like, okay, it's like an experience that no amount of knowledge can help you with. However, if you use knowledge the correct way and you actually you actually do use it, then that can help you too. So it's saying all sorts of different things at the same time, which I like. Yeah,
it certainly isn't. I think what I like about that the most is that there is a I guess again getting back to the sort of portrayal of evil and what evil is and how you deal with it. I mean, it just reminded me so much of like what you were saying before, Thomas, of I suppose like the cluster B personality disorders, where there's no way that you can sort of, I guess, force your way through it. You can't argue with it. You can't debate it. You can't fight it on its own terms. There's no way of engaging with it. You simply have to have this kind of the no contact ever again, or the ignoring it. Because it gets all of its power through your consent. Through your willingness to engage with it. And I thought that was again brought out fantastically. In the film, and it actually reminded me. It was kind of scary watching this film, for a second time, because I actually had my own kind of poltergeist experience when I was about 13, I think, and it makes me wonder, about the psychological and spiritual elements of perhaps inviting something in, and how history has shown so many times that these possessions and these kind of poltergeist experiences often happen to prepubescent children, who are just going into puberty, and they've got personality issues, hormonal things taking place, and
heavy pot smokers too.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about like casual users. I'm talking about like the types who are smoking from the morning to get up in the morning to when they go to bed. It's what happens. Two functions for this. One, a lot of heavy pot smokers tend to be very self-absorbed, obsessed with themselves, And this self-obsession often leads to a sort of like a pathological victim complex. Poor me, poor me. This coupled with the fact that when someone's a heavy pot smoker, they don't dream. When you don't dream, you become psychotic. This is like a well-known, neurological function. You stop dreaming, you eventually become psychotic. And a lot of these people, you have these murders that have happened on people who smoke. A lot of them where they smoke heavy amounts of weed. And I'm not putting down people who want to smoke weed. I'm talking about the ones who are it's just like alcoholics. It's there all the fucking time. They have the same kind of things have happened with them, and so it's very interesting. I actually do believe there are demonic forces. Now, I'm not saying they're actually beings or anything like that. Then we give them names. We call them Pazuzu. We call them Goronzon 333, Astaroth, Beelzebub. These are just names we give the fuckers. But what they are forces of the psyche that are almost like viruses that affect the biology, except they affect the psyche. And if you don't have a good immune system in your biology, you will get all kinds of infections. Well, they're the same thing with your psyche. If you don't have a developed or a good psyche, so you say you're a heavy drug user, an alcoholic, you're under extreme trauma, you're suffering from mental illness such as schizophrenia, or you're a delusional psychotic, you have essentially a psychic immune system that has failed. And I think that's basically what the whole film, The Exorcist, is telling us, is that the young girl, what was her name? Reagan, her psychic immunity because of the situation in the family, approaching puberty, where she was at the time, the mother's psychological state, everyone around her, the infection creeped in to the psyche. And this is really what these stories are telling us. They tell us that if you don't get your shit together in your own life, the demon will come knocking on your door. And it'll come from the lowest part of your subconscious mind. And this, I think Carl Jung called them autonomous complexes. They may have actually even be a manifestation of our own personalities, almost like our psyche doing correctional work upon us.
Yeah.
But they do happen. They do happen. And so, I mean, you can say, oh, it's just a silly horror film. Yeah, no, Jason from Friday the 13th isn't real. Isn't real. Frankenstein isn't real. Dracula isn't real. But I can tell you for a fact Pazuzu is.
Yeah.
Maybe not as a being, but as an energy force. He exists. And that, to me, is what makes that film so powerful. It's not dealing with imaginary horror, supernatural horror. It's dealing with real psychic horror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
all in the mind, too. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I don't subscribe to any particular like metaphysical outlook or anything like that. But again, I know I've had my own experience, and this is why it was kind of scary, is because I think the first real indication that we had in this film that something supernatural was happening was when Reagan said that her bed was rocking. And that was exactly what happened to me, in my experience. And I think I was 12, 13, something like that. And I woke up in the middle of the night and my bed was rocking like a cradle, and I could feel it and I could see it and I was absolutely awake. And I was, and then I remember seeing these eyes glaring out of the dark at me, they looked like cat's eyes or something like that. And just absolute terror, absolute, complete. I was petrified. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and so people can poo-poo that all they want, but this is the kind of experience that has come up again and again. And so when I see these descriptions of these, events happening in film, and then I think back to my own experience and how similar they were and how similar so many of the other stories were, it can't simply be dismissed. And my own gut has told me that yes, that this is the fact that this happens around puberty or just before puberty to most people, at least if it does happen, is usually some kind of a manifestation of of subconscious conflict in some way. You're going through a lot of changes. Perhaps there's trouble at home or anxieties in your own life, and because you don't have those psychological defenses up, because you haven't really figured out who you are yet, and because you can't quite make sense of the experiences on a conscious level, I think a lot of the time that these can be perhaps it's either a manifestation of something within your own consciousness, or perhaps you're, letting the door open for something else to come and toy with your own consciousness. But yeah, I think they're deeply related to the individual.
It's sad that the world we live in just wants to, at every occasion, just throw all this stuff out and say, no, that's just stupid. It's unscientific and there's nothing to it. Therefore, we're just going to ignore it all. And if you do that, you put yourself in a very dangerous situation. Like you're saying, Thomas, with the millennials are opening themselves up to being total victims for this, because they're not going to have any they're going to have nothing to fall back on. Like, well, what do I do? This is just a bunch of nonsense in my own head. It doesn't mean anything because, what do thoughts in my mind mean? They're not real. That you can't touch them. You can't feel them. And so this creeping in of scientism in society is that, to me, that's the most disturbing aspect of this whole film is that is the reality of what's actually happening. It's happened more and more since this film was made. And yeah, I don't know. But anything, Thomas, that you have to say to kind of like close this show here? Because I think we're coming towards the end.
Yeah, I think in 1973, a little girl made a movie that performed scenes in a film that shocked and stunned and traumatized the world. In 2016, that had been a pop music video.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'll leave it with that. And let anyone that people analyze that any way they want.
Yeah, well,
fair enough.
That kind of says it, doesn't it? It really kind of says it. I mean, if I was to sort of make any other final closing comments, I guess I just had some vague thoughts about this being some kind of I'm not going to go and say social experiment, but again, if we talk about the fact that some of the characters in this film seem to have some kind of a deeper understanding of what was going on, this is happening in a high society setting. Yeah, I wonder as to whether there is a deeper message that we haven't quite uncovered in this, and that this is, not to say that the meaning that you had just described to it, Thomas, is irrelevant, because I think that's absolutely what the deeper meaning is here. But it's almost as if there was another story being told in regard to people knowing what was going on, some kind of experimentation, some kind of foreknowledge or higher understanding of what's happening between all these institutions. Just given the locations and the plot devices that they've used in this film. So, yeah, I mean, people can think about that as well. I'm not sure.
And I'm not putting a moral thing on this. I don't, I'm not saying we've morally gone down. I just think we've always been pretty disgusting from the top to the bottom in society. It's been imposed upon us. But I'm not saying it's like there's a morality thing here. I'm just pointing out that what shocked people in the past is now normal to them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Miley Cyrus is what she does. That's our people being into that. I'm not saying I'm offended by it. I'm not a Christian. I couldn't give a shit. I don't care about those things. I really can't give a shit. That's one of the problems. One of the reasons I got out of the alternative and truth movement, because of this fake Christian Bible about morality. Yeah. That's all over the fucking thing, along with the racism that crept in. Yeah. I don't give a shit about these kinds of things. I don't care where people put their pink bits or what they do with them. It's their own private business. And I know that art is art, but I'm just saying the engineers who've engineered society have engineered us towards just like I said at the beginning, a Pazuzu-friendly model.
This is it, and this has always been my point, and the point that I try and make is not necessarily coming from a place of sanctimonious moral judgment about these things, but just simply saying, hey, look at this. This is something that was not shocking. Something that was very, very shocking a while ago is now par for the course now. And so we need to look at that and just ask as to, why? What's going on here?
It's calling into question a process. You're not making moral judgments. People don't know how to critique processes at a macrocosmic social level.
Without going to the moral judgment, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're given because that's what we have to do. That's kind of like the mechanism we've been indoctrinated with. Like, well, you have to get morally outraged, otherwise it doesn't matter.
And this is always the retort. This is always the retort you get when you make these comments as well. Is people say, "Oh, well, you're just you're just repressed and judgmental and hateful. And well, no, I'm just commenting as to what's real. And if we want to deal with what is, then we got to look at what is. So yeah, very interesting film. Is anything else you wanted to comment on, Aaron?
No, I think we should just have Thomas let us know for listeners what your website is, any projects that you have that you want people to know about, that stuff.
Well, okay, where do I start? I have a new book out called The Druid. Well, my website is www.thomassheridanarts.com, as has always been. My YouTube channel is Thomas Sheridan Arts. I have a new book out called The Druid Code, about my sort of like 30-odd years crawling around holes in the ground, megalithic sites, and fusing it with things like what we've been talking about tonight, mythology and so on. And what it really tells us, it's sort of like the first kind of philosophical tome I've written, but it's also a guidebook to the sort of like what they call the sacred sites of Europe. That's one thing. I have a documentary series coming out that I'm one of the hosts of, called Megalithic Odyssey, where I'm touring around Europe, basically crawling down holes in the ground again. That I'm working on my own productions I'm making the documentaries on occult symbolism and the occult nature of European cities, but not doing it in a hysterical, oh, they're all Satanists, boom, 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 boom. It's going to be
lots of fire, yeah.
It's going to be like Aaron's at the Age of Transitions. It will be a prosaic, well presented, no nonsense, no bullshit, hopefully artistically filmed and presented 45-minute documentaries that I'm putting together. The first one is on Dublin. I'm going to do London, Berlin, and a few other places, Vienna, and a few other cities, Prague. That's another thing I have going. My Velocity Now radio show was on and off because I'm very, very busy at work at the moment. My regular daytime Matrix job, which I'm very happy to have because it keeps me grounded and sane and makes me realize that, like a lot of the people in the alternative scene, are mad.
Yep.
But and they're not doing themselves any favors by locking themselves into it. And
your books.
And that's basically. And then loads of other things.
Puzzling people and defeated demons. I recommend those to anybody that's listening. There's the two excellent books that Thomas has written.
And Valpurgis Night and Gamble of the Psyche.
Yep, those two.
Thank you. And I'm a workaholic by nature. Anything will happen. That's basically it.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you very much for being here, Thomas. It's always great to talk to you. It's been, as we said, literally years, so it's been great.
Yeah, we'll have to.
It's brilliant hearing you.
We'll have to have you on again. We will definitely have to have you on again as a guest at some point in the future, or perhaps any other format, because I always enjoy our conversations. It's been great.
Brilliant, and maybe we can do some other films. Maybe at some point I might suggest some films to you guys to talk about. Maybe something that might surprise you that you wouldn't necessarily watch.
Yeah, well, this is one example. I mean, I when you suggested The Exorcist, it came right out of left field. I wasn't expecting that, but I'm absolutely glad that we covered it because it's been an interesting discussion. Yeah. So, absolutely. But for people who are interested in the podcast, website is tmpodcast.com. We also have a YouTube channel, Themes and Memes Podcast. You can subscribe to the RSS on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, and TuneIn. And you can also get us on Twitter at Themes Memes.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast was recorded on the 20th of October, 2016.